such a delight to be here with you. My name is Zoe Routh, and I'm based in Canberra, Australia. Originally imported from Canada because people are going to think, what is that accent? And how old am I? I am turning 51 next week. My story begins underneath a canoe in the wilds of Northwest Ontario in Canada. So, as a kid growing up, I went to summer camp every year. And one of the things I discovered was the absolute delight of going on an adventure by canoe with other fabulous young ladies or young women. And I remember on this one particular canoe trip, I slipped and fell carrying the canoe, and I was stuck underneath this canoe. Everybody else had gone on ahead, and I was stuck with this thing on top of me, and I was frustrated and angry and really cheesed off about the whole event. And then I realized, no one's going to be coming back for a while. I'm going to have to sort this out myself. So in that moment, I learned how to master a little bit of my feelings and decide that I wanted to take control of my destiny and not be stuck. And so I gathered myself together. There might have been a few swear words and a few little grunts along the way, but I got myself out from underneath that canoe and got the canoe out, unstuck, and carried on. That's probably the genesis of discovery of creating yourself anew in difficult circumstances. And from there, a few years later, fast forward, I led canoe trips for a number of years with that summer camp, and I got a job at Outward Bound in Australia when I was still in Canada, and this was going to be the adventure of a lifetime. And so I put my hat in the ring. I got this 13-month position, and I said goodbye to my friends and family and arrived in Australia in 1996, not knowing a single person, and to start my life anew. So I went from these small choice around underneath a canoe with my face in the mud to making these radical life decisions. And probably that's sort of where the story begins in terms of my leadership journey and my adventure here that's lasted 25 years in Australia.
That is absolutely fascinating. It takes a certain person, though, to do what you did. To move to the other side of the world, not knowing anyone, with no real plan. Tell me how you did that. What were the steps you took to make that decision, and what did you do when you arrived?
Well, let me see. The kernel of it was when I was studying at university, and university was, I felt like, was just an interruption of my summer camp life. It's the thing I had to do during winter before I could get back to living my happiest life, which was that summer camp leading canoe trips. And somewhere in there, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, I just live for this outdoors stuff. How could I do this year round? And I met a fabulous woman at university who was doing that. She said, "Oh yeah, I worked for Outward Bound, and I went to Malaysia, and they have outdoor schools around the world." I'm like, "Really? That's amazing." And that particular summer, I had met this fellow from New Zealand.
Okay.
I met this fellow from New Zealand. I had this fabulous love affair this one summer. I'm like, New Zealand, I wonder if they have an Outward Bound school. And they did. And I rang them up, and not knowing anything about time zones, I managed to call them at 2 o'clock in the morning, which was not so good. Didn't make such a great impression. Some crazy fool answered the phone and answered all my questions about how can I get a job at Outward Bound New Zealand. But they wanted 2 year commitment. I'm like, 2 years, that's way too long. So I decided I've embarrassed myself enough here. So I called the neighboring country, Australia, and found out at a better time zone and figured out what their time commitments. They only wanted 13 months. And at the time that felt like forever. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can leave everything I know in Canada for a 13-month adventure in Australia. So it wasn't, the decision was small at the time. Like, it was big looking back on it 25 years later. Like, wow, how did I do that? But it's like, it was just little decision, a little decision about let's go try something new and let's find out how to do it and what are the parameters and constraints around that. And that sort of tipped me over. And then it was a series of decisions, one after another, that led to me staying at Outward Bound for 9 years and them sponsoring my residency and me becoming a citizen. But originally it was like, that sounds like a fun idea. How do I do that? Who else has done that? How can we go about problem solving this thing? And I didn't think too much about what I was leaving behind, though I did absolutely miss my family incredibly in the first 12 months.
Wow. What an incredible story. I love hearing stories like this of people who step into the world, who are adventurous, who are curious. You definitely came to the right place in terms of that outdoorsy lifestyle that you were looking for. But it sounds to me like you gained a lot of techniques, ways of being. You further trained and went into the leadership sphere. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think working at Outward Bound, I've always believed is the biggest personal development experience you could ever have. And Outward Bound is about personal development in the outdoors. So
Yes.
all the programs we did with students was about helping people discover who they are and their own inner resilience and inner resources. So as we worked with students around that, we learned ourselves. And working as we did in the outdoors, you did learn a strong work ethic. You learned how to get along with others, how to survive internal politics, because yes, you still have internal politics in an organization like that, a not-for-profit. We all have people dynamics. So I became incredibly fascinated throughout my time there about what makes people tick, why some teams are amazing, and why things fall apart. Because both at summer camp in Canada as well as at Outward Bound, there were times in my experiences there where things didn't go so well. And it's like, how does this happen? Like these are like dream jobs, amazing people. And then from occasionally you have these really huge meltdowns. So that became one of the things I obsessed about in terms of my work with people. How does it get to that point? Can we do anything to prevent it? How do we navigate our way through that? And so my love affair with both the wilderness and people has sort of floated me downstream in my career ever since.
Oh, wow. That's absolutely fascinating. And you also have a health journey that you experienced cancer at some point.
I did. So that was another learning experience. And it was after I left Outward Bound after about 9 years working there.
Yeah.
And I decided to go out on my own. So another reinvention there. So I decided that I would become a business owner. And I'd been doing some coaching, executive coaching. First, I hired a coach and learned about how to do coaching. And that was a hugely transformational experience having my own coach. And I decided through that experience I wanted to do that as a modality for other people. I thought, wow, I learned so much about myself and gained so much from coaching. I want to help others do that. And so I started doing that on the side while I was still working at Outward Bound. And then in 2005, I'm like, that's it. I'm gonna start my own business. Of course, it's a very different life and a very different mentality to going from working at a not-for-profit to being an entrepreneur and running your own business. And I burnt myself out. I got super sick. I didn't know what I was doing. I was worried all the time. I wasn't making any money. And in the middle of 2005, a week after I got engaged to my husband, who's Australian, discovered I had cancer, which is a little bit of a stumbling block. And so that was, well, the brakes came on everything. So the business got parked for 6 months. My life went on hold. We still planned the wedding through all of that. It was actually one of the things that helped get through cancer, was probably going from doctor's appointments to going to find wedding venues and shopping for wedding dresses. It was a bizarre thing in retrospect. It's like, how do you switch gears like that? Well, it actually helped. It helped deal with
What a
the
beautiful distraction, though.
yeah, it was less a distraction, more of a focus, I'd say,
Uh-huh.
because I had to focus on medical stuff and then I'd focus on the wedding, which was something to look forward to, I guess,
Yeah.
as we worked our way through all of that. So that was a pretty difficult 6 months going through the treatment period. So I had major surgery and then chemotherapy, and that all wrapped, like finished up the treatment part of it end
Yes.
of August, and we got married in December. But it took like 3 years of trying to piece together my health again and actually who I was and what this experience meant and what did I want differently for myself in the future. So that was definitely another reinvention point right there.
Yeah.
One that I hadn't chosen for myself, but got given to me.
Yes. 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 Now, a lot of women go through these health challenges at certain points in our lives. I'm recovering from heart failure. I know what it's like to literally rebuild from scratch a body that I had neglected through stress. What were the lessons? What were the learnings that you got out of that experience?
One of the gifts was I gave myself permission to say no to a lot of things
Yes.
that had piled up on my plate that were obligations as opposed to
Ah,
commitments. So I dropped a lot of the shoulds. I'm like, no, I'm ditching that, I'm ditching that, ditching that. And gave myself permission just to experience the day. And that's when going through chemo, didn't have too much energy for much else either, actually. But it helped me learn how to savor the small moments, the ability to get up and go outside. And even if it was only walking 100 meters, because that's all I could do that day, uh, just savoring the
Celebration.
birds, the nature, and all that kind of stuff. So that has stayed with me ever since then. It's been 2005, that's 16 years ago now. That quality of observation and being present has definitely stayed with me. It gave me permission also to ask the bigger questions about like life is very fleeting. What, how do I actually want to experience it? What
Mm.
are the things that I want to enjoy throughout this time frame? What's important to me? What's not important to me? I still find myself though, and I think this is important thing. It wasn't like my life transformed completely. Like some things have stayed as lessons I have to keep relearning, which is try not to overdo it. Do you need to balance effort with rest? So that is a continual lesson that I have to keep coming back to.
Yeah.
And I think I'm working out. I'm working a better relationship with my body and working out a better relationship with that sort of rest and effort balance. Um, so these are the kinds of things that have helped me to stay on track or to develop new ideas. But I guess having the courage to do something different and was something I came back to too. Like after that experience, I was pretty worn out. So I went back, instead of going straight back into my business, actually I did go straight back into my business and found myself struggling again for 3 years. And it was a long 3 years, not really making it work. I took a job and I gave myself permission, like, just give yourself permission to make it easy. So I took on a job and I was in that job for 5 years and still kept my business going one day a week on the side because there's this dream I didn't want to let go of. And that's one of the lessons I took with me from the cancer into that choice was like, things are important to you. Don't just throw them away. And there was a couple times in that 5 year period, I'm like, this would just be easier. I just ditched it. And then something inside me said, no, don't.
Keep going.
Yeah. And I started to see everything as a learning experience. So there
Mhm.
were times when I took that job where I didn't want to do a job anymore. I felt like a business failure, an entrepreneur failure. I'm like, well, that's not very helpful. Why don't we enjoy this experience for what it is and lean into it and learn from it? And I learned so much about leadership, about facilitation, about training, all these great professional skills, which would serve me beautifully when I did finally decide to leave and go full time back into my own business, which I've been in managing full time for the last 7 years, and it's flourished as a result of that. So yeah, it's lots of great insights from going through a healing journey like that. And I
Yeah.
think it's different for everybody. I was blessed by having fabulous friends and family around me to support me through that. So my lessons around that were also to take note and nurture the relationships that nurture me.
Oh, I love that. That's absolutely beautiful. And so now here we are. Right now, a lot of women are experiencing having to reinvent themselves with the advent of COVID, making certain choices, whether to stay in a job or quit and start something new. When people are transitioning, what advice would you give somebody who's trying to find, what is my next step in life?
I think becoming a reflective practitioner is a really important aspect of that. So, journaling is one of the things I always get my leaders to work on. So,
Yes.
interviewing yourself about, asking the same question: what's important to you? Uh, if when you see yourself in 5 years, how do you want to feel in those 5 years? What do you want to be seeing, hearing, experiencing 5 years down the track? Not necessarily what do you want to be doing, because that
Yes.
becomes very narrow. But think
Oh,
about the broader quality of your life in 5 years' time. and really sort of move into that. Like, what's the general feeling they want to be experiencing? I was talking to a client today about this. Asked him that question. I'm like, 5 years from now, how do you want to be feeling? He's like, calm and focused. I'm like, great, calm and focused. Not trying to plan out what job he's going to be doing, calm and focused. I'm like, okay, so reverse engineer it. So if you want to be calm and focused, what are the things that we need to do now to put that in place? What are things that need to be obstacles to be overcome, or new habits to put in place? So we reverse engineer it that way. That's sort of one suggestion, is to definitely start to interview yourself around what the future could look like and feel like. And the second piece, because often what stops people is like, oh, I don't feel confident in order to do this. And I always encourage people to think less about confidence and more about courage, because it's only in taking courageous action that you build confidence. It's only through taking those little risks one bit at a time that you then allow confidence to come along for the ride. So in doing that, one of the things I recommend is leaning on archetypes. So archetypes is something I've written about in two of my books. My first one, Composure, and my latest one, People Stuff. And archetypes are stories that we are familiar with. They are patterns of human development that we can resonate with. And think of an archetype that symbolizes the journey that you want to embark on. So for some, it might be the pioneer. For others, it might be the warrior. For others, it might be the elder or the statesman or the diplomat. For others, it might be the mother. For others, it might be the crone. There's thousands of different archetypes. I've got 5 that I talk about in People Stuff, which is more specific to a leadership point of view. However, you can pick any one of those particular archetypes that feels vivid and live to you. And why I think archetypes, as opposed to styles like leadership styles or personal qualities, is that archetypes, you can embody their narrative. You can become that. And so you can lean on this pattern, and all of a sudden it becomes your pattern that you can live and express as well. So I often think about that, if I'm doing work with others or being interviewed, which archetype do I want to express in this? And often it's the elder. Maybe it's because I've got a few more gray hairs, but it resonates for me.
Knowledge.
Yeah. Wisdom and compassion is what crystallizes the elder archetype for me. And when I am embodying that, I'm much more relaxed, I'm much more open, I'm much more receptive and in service. And so that's one way of an example of one way you can step into this transitional phase.
I love that. So let's finish our interview by taking and teleporting you into the future.
Okay.
So if time was an illusion and your past, your present could exist in the same timeline, and you could teleport to the 100-year-old you and have a conversation with that woman, based on how you have lived your life and what everything life has taught you, what would you say to her?
From my 51-year-old self to my 100-year-old self?
Yes.
I think I'd be asking a lot of questions. I'd be asking a lot of questions, going, what was the thing that I needed to stop doing at this age? And what was the thing I needed to start doing? And what are the things I needed to do every day so that I could end up at 100, not regretting anything and feeling like I capitalized on my opportunity to live this full and awesome life? What do I need to shift my focus on in order to experience the fullness of that? And how do I channel the wisdom of 100 into 51 now? And how do I show up relaxed and passionate? And my 100-year-old self, I'm looking at her and she's got a little crinkle in her eye, and she's got a crinkle and a twinkle. It's like, how do I get a bit of crinkle and twinkle every day?
I love that. That is just beautiful. Yeah, I ask women this question because I do believe that time is an illusion, that we are born with the knowing of everything we're supposed to do in this life. And for me personally, I go into meditation when I'm struggling and not sure which way to go. And I do talk to her and I just ask her, what am I supposed to do? Because we are born with these knowings. We know exactly why we're on this planet and how we're going to get to that beautiful, wise woman at the age of 100. But sometimes we forget, and we can still tune into her energy and get her to guide us there.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. I can do that in the journal too. So often it's my little whiny voice that gets page time in the journal. It's like, what are you worrying about today? La, 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 la. Maybe I should have a written conversation with my 100-year-old self too.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for this interview. Now, I'm going to throw in one more question. Is there
Sure.
anything I should have asked you that I missed out?
I don't think so. I assume everything is perfect and complete in terms of the interaction. There's nothing left out, I don't think. I'm so glad to have met you, Gertrude, and I'm very happy to connect with your listeners. It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for gracing us with your wisdom today. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. I told you we have some amazing women who are stepping up, sharing their stories, their wisdom with the rest of our community. Come back again tomorrow when I have yet another interesting woman from a different part of the world. But have a fantastic day, everybody, wherever you are. And thank you again, Zoe. Wonderful interview.
You're welcome.
Thank you.